Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished speakers, panelists, and colleagues, my name is Jean d'Aragon, Senior Sustainable Development Expert at the UN Office for Sustainable Development, or UNOSD, in Incheon, Republic of Korea. Welcome and thank you all for joining this third session of the Executive Training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The course is organized by UNOSD, which is part of UNDESA, Division for Sustainable Development Goals. The general objective of this training is to build the knowledge, skills, mindsets, and general capacities of member states for implementing sustainable development planning, policy making, policy shaping through an integrated approach. This course is closely linked to the next high-level political forum on sustainable development, known as HLPF, which will take place in New York in July 2022. Through this training course, we hope to help you achieve a better understanding of the successes, challenges, lessons learned, and good practices related to the implementation of the SDGs, and particularly the SDGs 4 on quality education, 5 on gender equality, 14 on life below water, 15 life on land, and 17 on partnerships for the goals, which are the 5 sustainable development goals, or SDGs, that will go under in-depth review on the through the voluntary national reviews, VNRs, during the HLPF next July. So in the past, our executive training course for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development brought together about 100 participants from all over the world to learn from the lectures and discussions over 4 to 5 days in Incheon in South Korea. Unfortunately, this flagship activity of UNOSD could not take place in person again this year, like last year, due to COVID-19 pandemic. For that reason, we are meeting again this week through a series of 2.5-hour online sessions over 4 days between the 11th and 14th of April. We can't wait to go back to the in-person format of the executive training as soon as possible. Meanwhile, through the presentation and discussion during the week, we hope that this training course will help you understand better the issues around the HLPF and the 5 SDGs that will be the focus of attention at the HLPF next July. It is also our hopes that the training course will prepare you to engage more actively in the implementation of the review process of the SDGs in your own countries. During the 2 first sessions held on Monday and Tuesday, we looked at SDG 4 on quality education and SDG 5 on gender equality. Today, the session will be dedicated to SDG 14 on life below water. We'll hear about ocean economy, sustainability, and enabling policies for human security. The second presentation will be on state of the SDG 14, interconnectedness and policy coherence. Then we'll hear about disaster risk reduction and prevention of ocean-related sustainability challenges and related policy considerations. Then we'll have a presentation on global analysis of riverine fisheries and ecosystems, challenges and policy recommendations. The next one will be illegal, unreported, and unregulated, or IUU fishing. Then a presentation on plastic pollutions and recycling, examples from the Philippines. And the last presentation, but not the least, addressing marine plastic pollution in the context of Myanmar. So, thank you. Now I'd like to move on and share, starting with introducing the facilitator moderator for this session. So I'd like to introduce our consultant, Ms. Licia Sainer Yu, who is a professor in organization development and institutional learning. Ms. Saner-Yu had been working with UNOSD, providing support around the organization and holding the executive training for policymakers on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development over the last couple of years. And we are delighted that she accepted to work again with us this year. So Ms. Saner-Yu will introduce the themes of the sessions, and then we'll introduce the speakers before they make their presentation. So Ms. Saner-Yu, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. So you may take the floor now.
Thank you very much, Jean, for giving me the nice introduction, and I'm looking forward to our future collaboration in this very exciting journey. And I hope by 2030 we can all sit down together and celebrate the achievement that we have been able to make. Can I have move the slides, please? I just wanted to quickly remind what is 2030 Agenda all about, because today's topic, from my personal point of view and also observation of SDG 14, Life Below Water, is actually a topic which is not so familiar most of the time for related scientists and experts. So we have really sort of a need to remind the non-fishery related ministries and sectors who are working on toward SDG that SDG is an integrated agenda. But most importantly, it is a global contract, a global agreement that we say we're going to collaborate and move forward together so that we will not leave any one of the targets behind. But also the agenda itself represents different voices, including the people. And most significantly, the UN has done a really thorough online survey to bring in many of the unheard voices. So, even though it's not perfect, we may say so, but it is a very effective roadmap so that we know, how to move forward on this journey forward. The key concept is about leaving no one behind. And I think, we have heard many of that. However, in the policy planning and thinking and design, oftentimes the unheard, the invisible, the remote, or the vulnerable are not sort of taking into consideration. So part of the debate that throughout the last 2 days and also with remaining today and tomorrow, we want to bring in the partnership perspective so that we can make sure that the leaving no one behind is not just a slogan, but it's actually something can be achieved. And we are very happy that we have a strong voice. We have many strong voices from the NGO sector to contribute positively and constructively in terms of their perspectives. And learning, of course, is a very important part of it. Next one, please. And John already gave you a very good overview, so I will not belabor the point, but just sort of highlight there are some thematic focuses that we narrow the topic, which is very broad, to a more manageable size. Next one. The ETC courses, like before, and this year, it is presented as a multi-stakeholder conversation. And it's making an effort by inviting specialists and experts renowned in the field to talk about the more wicked aspect of the challenge. So you will see that, again, we are very specific and also trying to sort of bring forward some policy recommendations for the policymakers to consider. Next one, please. Today we have together 7 speakers, 5 gentlemen and 2 ladies. And I'm very happy that, we not only have the government view, the NGO view, but most importantly, a private sector view in terms of from an organization point of view, how a business could also contribute to the solution of the ocean challenges or ocean-related issues. So we're looking very much forward to today's presentation. I will give the individual introduction when each speakers come into their turn. Oh, yeah, And I would like to now introduce Mr. Andrew or Dr. Andrew Birchenough. Before I get to that, I have one slide which will be coming back when Fabienne will give her keynote speech today. However, if you look at the current state of the ocean by looking at 5 indicators, the situation looks rather dire, and well, it's more than just urgent. So I think we need to double our effort. So with this, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Andrew Birchenough. Andrew has been working for the IMO since 2017, and his main responsibility is to make sure that London Convention and Protocol and Protocol is actually going to be implemented. This particular convention and protocol is to deal with the dumping of waste and other matters at sea. And so I'm inviting Andrew to give a view to look at ocean as resources, and how can we use it substantially, so that it could actually create a better environment for the ocean as itself, as well as for the human well-being. So with that, I also want to stress that he's not only working from a scientific aspect about the challenge, about this policy domain, but he has also been being a good scientist himself. And I'm very impressed that underwater noise is actually a topic for so many of our speakers today. And I learned quite a bit about why it is important. So the floor is yours, and please share us with your insights in terms of how can we make ocean economy, which is the new frontier that being talked about, actually sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucia, and hello to everyone. Can you hear me okay and see my screen? That's excellent. That's a good start. Well, first of all, thank you for that very nice introduction, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here with you on day 3 of your training course, which certainly looks very, very interesting. And I would just like to say, thank you on behalf of the IMO for inviting us into this, and particularly on this session, Life Below Water, which is obviously very, very important to me. You've given a little bit of an introduction, but I actually work. The IMO is based in London, but I work in the Marine Environment Division, as you mentioned, in the Office for the London Convention and Protocol and Ocean Affairs. So we've got a small team, but quite a wide remit, primarily being, as you mentioned, the implementation of the treaties, the London Convention and Protocol, but I'll explain a little bit more about that later. The topic of my talk today was based really around the ocean economy and sustainability, really, and life below water. But obviously, with my perspective, I'll go into a little bit of the work of the, just touch on some of the work of the IMO, and indeed the program that you've got today. A lot of the work the IMO doing is covering many of these topics, being the sort of international regulator for shipping, and we'll touch on those. But I wanted to really, being the first person to talk today, was really just to give a real heads up in terms of the general actual importance of the ocean, as you can see there. And well, I mean, often as we call it now, the blue planet, and probably David Attenborough is famous for now for the program and developing that phrase, that term. But you can see that from there, the most of our planet is blue. In fact, so over 70% of the world's surface is covered by ocean, and it makes it vitally important for the healthy functioning of our world, and in fact the prosperity and health of humankind. That ocean there, you can see, just absorbs heat, carbon dioxide, generates oxygen for us, and is vital in regulating our climate system and our water cycle. And as I'm sure you will have all seen, it's a COP26 that was held in Glasgow in Scotland just at the end of last year. The importance of the ocean is increasingly getting more attention, and we now come to recognize, hopefully, that we need to look after that ocean in order to provide everything, the goods and services that we need to sustain life on this planet. And I think it's around over 40% of the world's population live within about 150 kilometers of the coast, and many hundreds of millions more actually visit the coastal environments and use it for health benefits. Not only for health benefits, but obviously it's got vitally important economic benefits as well. So we're all vitally connected to the sea. In terms of the ocean economy, it's estimated that around $1.5 trillion a year the ocean contributes to the global economy. I think that was a figure that was from the OECD a number of years ago. I'm not sure that figure has actually been revised since then, but certainly they did project that by 2030 the ocean economy would be worth around 3 trillion. So huge amounts of money, huge amounts of importance that we place on the oceans for our economic health. And hundreds of millions of people are directly employed. I think the OECD estimated at around 30 million were directly employed in relation to the ocean and coastal environments, largely through capture fisheries, but also maritime transport and coastal tourism, and less so, but equally important, through energy production and things like pharmaceuticals and things like that. And indeed, the economic activity has been and is forecast to expand rapidly in the ocean. And we've got a lot of emerging industries that we're now seeing that are being developed. We've had so many technological developments over recent years, and so it enables us to exploit more from the ocean. Basically, we're getting better at it, and so we need it more. Things like one that's in the news at the moment, potentially, that may be an extractive industry, deep sea mining, that's regulated by the International Seabed Authority. That's very prominent at the moment with the discussions that are going on there, because they are developing their environmental regulations to manage that activity should it take place. But that industry is being driven by humans' need to develop economically and technologically, because a lot of the important marine minerals, rare earth minerals, can be found on the deep on the floor in the deep ocean, and that's why it's really been a focus. And the technology has advanced so much in recent years that that industry is potentially just a short while away from taking effect. But obviously there are implications of that in terms of the health of the marine environment, and that's something that's being looked at particularly. So the economic activity is expanding, and there's no doubt that the ocean has been and always has been and will be essential for our future prosperity, not only economically, but for our health as well. But that economic activity is characterized by an often complex variety of different risks, and really the foremost one which we need to address, and which is the focus of certainly SDG 14 and many of the others, is the health of the ocean. And we've all of those activities, so we've got lots of activities that are taking place in the marine environment, fishing, shipping, obviously, which IMO is directly involved in regulating, biotechnology. I mentioned energy, so wind energy, tidal energy, pharmaceuticals, all sorts of those things. But for us to take those things, take those resources and use the oceans for what we need for transport and so on, we are having a significant impact on the ocean, and the ocean health has been deteriorating for many years, and it's increasingly now at the top of the agenda, the fact that we need to address this. And as I mentioned, climate change, particularly climate change, is high on the agenda at the moment, with greenhouse gas emissions. The climate is warming, which has a direct impact on the oceans. They're becoming warmer, which has impacts on the species that live there, which has impacts on circulation patterns, which also makes the CO2 makes the oceans more acidic, which has significant impacts. Rising sea level as a result, and these have tremendous implications for all of humankind, but especially in some of the more vulnerable states that are more reliant on the ocean resources and are particularly vulnerable to climate change impacts, such as small island developing states. So they're really a focus and really at the forefront of those climate change activities and efforts to address the impacts. Of course, marine pollution, which I'm heavily involved in. We will hear later on about marine plastic litter, microplastics, and the increasing destruction and implications of marine plastic litter in the marine environment. Coarse contaminants from industry, from runoff, eutrophication, so nutrient runoff from agriculture, all having significant effects on the marine environment, and particularly the coastal environments where those activities are more closely, the point sources are more closely connected. And this, along with some of our extractive industries like fishing, leads and potentially leads to destruction of habitats, trawling, those type of things, and biodiversity loss. So we need to address those issues, and that's what I would say the global community has been coming together to address, and hopefully we're moving in the right direction. And I will explain a little bit. I just want to, I put, obviously I'm based in the IMO, so we're a regulator for shipping, but some of the risks from shipping, for instance, on the oceans are operational discharges. Those are regulated, but things like oil that can result from normal discharges or indeed accidents, and we've seen some significant accidents over the recent years, last year or so in Sri Lanka and off Mauritius as well, with the Wakashio and the FSO Safer, which have spilled oil into the marine environment in generally really sensitive, protected, often protected areas, which has caused grounding, and it physically damages habitats as well. And one of the things Lucia mentioned was ocean underwater noise. That's something that we're starting to, we have been addressing in the IMO for a number of years. We've got guidance on the risks from underwater noise, but that was developed in 2014, and our knowledge of the impacts of noise and how to mitigate it more have developed significantly. So we're currently reviewing those guidance and hoping to redevelop that and update that guidance so it has a real impact on one of those noise, which is seen again ocean noise is seen as a contaminant. So those are some of the things from shipping. Oh, sorry, Lucia, I didn't.
Excuse me, Andy.
Yep.
3 more minutes, please.
Okay, no worries. Yeah. Well, what I'll do is
you.
I'll probably just skip through some of my initial slides, but they're on the presentation. But obviously, IMO, it's a regulator for shipping. We have a regulatory framework here in the IMO, which there's an interplay between the environment and obviously the safety of shipping, and this all regulated under what originally was under UNCLOS. So we have a lot of international treaties which are adopted, shipping related pollution, the one I'm involved in, ocean dumping, and we also cover oil and gas platforms in a certain extent as well. Those are some of the areas that we're covering. Ballast water management, air pollution is a real key one at the moment in terms of emissions and greenhouse gas. We have an IMO action plan to address marine plastic litter from ships. So a range of issues, and in addition also dealing with some protected areas through the IMO, particularly particular sensitive sea areas, PSSAs, which are adopted to address impacts from international shipping. I'll briefly mention the London Convention and Protocol. Those are the two treaties that regulate the dumping of waste at sea. And over the years, we've banned significant inputs into the marine environment from waste that have been disposed, so industrial waste, radioactive waste, to the point now where there's only a few waste, a number of waste which can be disposed at sea. So ever increasing some of those potential inputs into the environment. And increasingly, we're looking at climate change as well. We actually regulate some of the climate change mitigation technologies, which, while required to mitigate climate, can affect the ocean. So we, particularly carbon capture and storage in the subsea bed and marine geoengineering. Obviously, there's a relationship between where we are at the global level and sea-based activities, land-based activities and atmospheric inputs. And all of these is an interplay between the global, regional and the national level, which is just shown on that diagram there. We contribute, obviously, as a UN agency through to all of the wider UN processes, and in terms of ocean governance, I'll highlight a couple there. Obviously, the sustainable development, the agenda for sustainable development, the BBNJ areas beyond national jurisdiction, so conserving biodiversity in there, the regular process. You can see the World Ocean Assessment there, which has been vital for our understanding in how we can improve. So there's a range of things that we cover. And of course, central to that is us trying to contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. And SDG 14, which you'll hear about, is certainly central to the IMO. But we've also linked, as you can see on that diagram, to all of the other SDGs as well in some way. So I think finally, I mentioned the health of the oceans, I've mentioned the ocean economy, but I think really it needs to come together in what we now term the blue economy, the sustainable blue economy, and ensuring that is critical to our oceans, and it's critical to our future. And we need to do things, I've said there, I think better, smarter, collaborate better, communicate better, and I think the COVID pandemic has enabled us to do that and offers us a fresh opportunity to do that. So finally, as was mentioned before, we need to leave no one behind in those endeavours. So with that, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Andy, for for keeping the time.
Thank you.
I think it also offers a very good opening in terms of making a business case why everyone, from individuals to the state, and also international organizations need to start thinking very seriously about what is happening in terms of this new economic frontier, which of course has been very much exploited over the years, especially when the economy has become globalized in the last 10, 20 years. There are many effects. One question, I think, I will leave this on the floor, and maybe you can think about it and address it later, which is also a common theme from what we have found in the pre-program survey, is that yes, we have regulations, yes, we have conventions, yes, we are making national laws. However, implementation tend to be, sort of lagging behind. So, and I wonder, what else can we do in this context to actually make the policies and commitments real. So with that note, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Fabienne McLellan, to offer her assessment and research in terms of what is the current state of SDG 14. After we have heard the international organizations, how do they come together and deal with this particular challenge, which is very sizable. Fabienne, she is the managing director for OceanCare. It's an NGO based in Zurich. And personally, she has been very active as a participant and advocate in terms of the process of UN clause, which is UN Convention of the Law of the Sea in New York. But she's also participate in the discussion of some of the daughter implications, and also will be actively involved in the coming Ocean Conference. As a matter of fact, the group is punching above their weight. They are not only personally active and engaged, but they are also very active in putting forward proposals to and through the UN process, the international processes in terms of what needs to happen. So I would like to give the floor to Fabienne now to share with us in terms of her observation and also findings about current state of SDG 14. The floor is yours, Fabienne.
Thank you so much, Lucia, for this very kind introduction. And I feel very honored to be invited as a speaker at today's event and be among such knowledgeable and illustrious panelists. So thank you very much for the opportunity. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody listening in from around the world. It's really an exciting opportunity. I will just be sharing my slides right now and hope that this will work smoothly. I see, Lucia, that it has worked. And funnily enough, and I'm very grateful, Andy, for your wonderful presentation and introduction. Actually, I realized there are so many points that I prepared that are now becoming redundant because you brilliantly covered it already. So funnily enough, I used exactly the same image because I think it is so striking. So of course, I will now not go into those aspects that you have already covered so eloquently, but perhaps just adding one point you were mentioning, we're talking now about the blue planet. We should also be talking really about the blue lung, looking at the ecosystem services the ocean provide in terms of half of the oxygen we breathe. So every second breath we take comes really from the ocean. And so it is indeed our life support system that we heavily depend upon. So I will move on from this blue planet actually to the maritime zones that are beyond national jurisdictions, because that's such an important aspect, because the high seas or areas beyond national jurisdiction, ABNJ, they cover 2/3 of the world's ocean and 50% of the Earth's overall surface. So that's basically the area that starts off the 200 nautical mile limit, the so-called EZ. And in the high seas, there is basically no country that can claim sovereignty. So many nations can set out and exploit those resources so far in ABNJ. And it's truly an epitome of the common heritage of mankind. So these global commons belonging to everyone and no one. And just to recall that currently only about 1% of the high seas are protected compared to 12% of land areas. So really the ocean, as this prime example of a global common, is prone to overexploitation, threatening marine biodiversity. And again, Andy, you covered this already. I just put together some additional photos to illustrate excessive fishing activities, deep sea mining, the machinery on the bottom left, just giving a sense of the impact this can have on the vulnerable seafloor that has not really been as scientifically researched and has been less scientifically researched actually than the moon's surface. We have marine plastic pollution, where we will be hearing much more from colleagues later on the panel, and of course shipping impact that Andy has mentioned so vividly. So basically, with all these activities, we're starting to destroy our life support system. So therefore, the SDG 14 is more pressing, more urgent than ever. So here are just some key points that I will not go through in much detail. The slides will be later put on the platform as well for everybody to look at in their own time. But I just felt that these are some crucial elements that I would like to make, because these individual threats, they also work cumulatively, and the latest IPCC report, I think, should be shaking us to our bones in terms of what this cumulative dimension has on the impacts on our ocean. And in making now the relation in terms of the interconnectedness with other SDGs, we can really easily draw these connections. And this is obviously very obvious and already known, but of course the implications in the ocean has ramification across all the SDGs, but particularly on SDG 1 with regard to poverty eradication, livelihoods, the goals, keyword, moving towards zero hunger, and also severely worsening the climate crisis with ocean acidification, increasing ocean dead zones, etc. So it starts to become more and more evident that these issues are severely cross-cutting and therefore posing relevant challenges as well. And in terms of lack of a global governance framework, again, Andy has provided a very neat chart on this, and I will also make a quick reference to that. But that is a severe challenge now with the process, the so-called BBNJ process, developing the first legally binding high seas treaty. We are now in the final stages. Hopefully by August with IGC 5, there will be this treaty that is being achieved. So these governance gaps are step by step being closed with positive benefits for ocean conservation and therefore also allowing sustainable development. And the other key treaty that is now in the making and a very exciting process that happened within UNEA, setting the foundation work for developing a legally binding instrument that addresses plastic pollution along the entire life cycle. So there is a lot happening, but there are just really significant challenges that everybody who participates here will be very familiar with, and obviously also from different perspectives, from governments, from academia, NGO, IGOs, etc. In terms of the blue economy, and I will not go into that because it will be an own panel presentation on itself, but questions I wanted to trigger is, what kind of blue economy do we want? What kind of blue economy can the planet carry? And there, with additional technological innovations, very exciting developments happening, but also recalling the precautionary principle in terms of these implications. For instance, geoengineering is a big and contested issue that I think illustrates the need for a precautionary principle very nicely. And again, as has already been said by previous speakers, that the element of building back better, greener, bluer, more just, and more inclusive is so crucial in order to leave no one behind. I will not, so I hope I'm not scaring you with this chart, which looks a little bit archaic, but I thought it was quite neat. I will not go into detail because Andy covered it already, but I just wanted to show this diagram of quite this fragmented global ocean governance following preliminary a sectoral approach. So we have now had a very in-depth insight into the IMO, but there are other foci being set with the Food and Agriculture Organization being the core body in terms of fisheries. Then we have more the biodiversity focused fora, of course, with the CBD, but also others, and then also other bodies that are not sitting within the UN systems, for instance, the International Whaling Commission, which is doing incredibly important work in terms of conserving marine megafauna as well. So just to bear that in mind, because it's crucial to understand also the barriers probably to really quickly and ambitiously achieve the SDGs and the individual targets. I just, I would like to, and not dwell on this too long, but I think this is a very helpful visualization of the interconnectedness of the SDGs by Johan Rockström, where the SDGs are not in the usual linear chart, but it shows that the biosphere and the respective SDGs is the foundation, is the absolute basis, the life support system where everything, where the three dimension of this sustainable development is built upon. Without the biosphere, the other SDGs cannot exist. And so I think this is a very helpful illustration in this respect. And I just wanted to share that with you. And Lucia already referred to the 5 Ps, which is also the guiding framework in looking at the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development with people, planet, prosperity, partnerships and peace, etc., as it helps us to look at those issues much more in an interconnected and universal way. So now delving into SDG 14, again, I will of course not go through all the targets because you are most familiar with them. Everybody knows there are 10 targets and 10 indicators. I just summarized them here, added some highlights just to have them again on top of our minds. What I think is very crucial to look at is the maturity of the targets. So we already see there are several targets that have matured in 2020 already. There are 14.1 on marine pollution. It will be maturing in 2025 very soon. And then with 14.7, an important one for small island developing states that is maturing by 2030. So we have no time to waste. And sadly, we already have failed on some of these targets that were maturing by 2020. There is a really terrific report that everybody, of course, is familiar with, the Quadrennial Global Sustainable Development Report that has been produced by an independent group of 15 scientists. And that was published in 2019, apologies. And I have just selected a few of those very helpful charts to again show this interconnectedness and how there are, of course, co-benefits in achieving SDG 14 across all the different SDGs, but there are also trade-offs that have to be made. And so this is a lovely illustration about that. And I just thought, and I'm just so thrilled to hear the issue of ocean noise pollution coming up so dominantly, because as an invisible form of pollution, it sometimes gets less attention than the more sort of visible forms of pollution, such as plastics or chemicals. But according to this definition by the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, noise pollution as form of energy definitely falls within this definition of pollution, and therefore we have to think about this also in terms of achieving SDG 14.1, where we are now already lagging behind. So I will just briefly run through the issue of ocean noise to illustrate what implications it has on other SDGs, because there is now growing scientific evidence about the impacts of noise, for instance, on fish stocks and fish catch rates, including invertebrates as well. And so, of course, we already see that noise has implications on SDG 1 and SDG 2 in terms of poverty, in terms of livelihood by fisher folk, for instance, if commercial fish catch rates are dropping. And also, of course, Lucia, sorry, I heard your voice.
Yeah, I just need to remind you 3 more minutes.
Oh, thank you very much.
You need to wind down your very, very, very important points that is coming.
Thank you. I will.
Coming,
okay, yeah. I will hurry up. Thank you so much, Lucia, for the reminder. So just as an illustration, that all these impacts have an interconnectedness with the other SDGs. And now looking at the implementation on how we are faring on SDG 14, one quite worrying finding is that there is actually quite a distance on 2 SDGs in terms of achieving them. I included the indicators and also the long-term negative trend pertaining to SDG 4.1, marine pollution of all kinds, and ending of overfishing. So it's not only that we haven't achieved SDG by 2020, the respective target, but the trend is not looking good. And I just wanted to highlight that. We will also, panelists later on will be delving into the, of course, overfishing issue much more, and IU fishing, but already there we see some very worrying trends. And again, we are not on track in achieving this. Lucia, you have already shared these very helpful dashboards that have been developed, and I must say there are so many excellent assets out there. Please, it's exciting to look into this, and you already mentioned in looking at individual 5 indicators, it is not looking good, and we see where the significant challenges remain with regard to the overall achievement on the SDG 14 life below water. I included a further one on fish caught from overexploited or collapsed stocks. So feel free to browse through the dashboards because they give such a relevant insight. As well here, I just included by region what the progress has been and also what the challenges are by region and income groups. And we see this overall major challenges remain: stagnation, decreasing. So it is actually looking quite challenging. I will now just wind up with regard to vertical and horizontal coherence, this very important aspect. And the policy experts that are participating here will be much more familiar with that than I am, but just reminding that this vertical and horizontal coherence in achieving the SDGs is absolutely crucial. There is a very helpful framework out there developed by the OECD in helping advancing this coherent element in applying that by national, regional, but also international level. So I just included a snapshot about this model for you to look at later on. So overall, in now wrapping up, we need to accelerate action on ocean conservation. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but some of crucial points of what is needed, because marine conservation and sustainable development is intricately linked. And so there are very tangible steps, actions that can be taken in improving the situation in our ocean. And also just an offer from civil society that we are standing by in providing expertise, and according to SDG 17, highlighting the need for partnerships that we can help governments and also within the governance systems to achieve the SDGs by the provision of expertise and reports. We have done a comprehensive report on the status of threats in the European waters, and we can also help mobilize, redirect and unlock existing additional resources, be there financial, technological, capacity building, storytelling, etc. And also just as a point that we do sometimes hold really longer term knowledge because we are not undergoing government cycles. And this knowledge is continuing and can be shared also with delegation that might be already also new in certain fora where expertise already exists. So we are standing by, we are excited to collaborate and really accelerate action to achieve SDG 14. And here just a reminder, with the upcoming UN Ocean Conference, there is an opportunity again to contribute to the excellent declaration that has already been put up. I hyperlinked it here. Next consultation round is on the 22nd of April, which is a great opportunity again to provide input to this crucial document. Thank you so much for your attention and patience as well.
Well, Fabienne, I'm really apologetic, just like similar to Andy, that I'm cutting you off earlier and you have much more to say. And I also want to underscore the importance to participate in the global consultation process. The people's voice and civil society's voice do count, and they have often been, maybe not immediately, but over time, been taken into consideration. Because in the chat, I saw that Dr. Soma, for example, has been talking about the concern of the growing ocean economy, and it's especially during and because of the COVID crisis that more and more it's about, sort of people are not traveling, so everything goes virtual and a lot of transportation goes onto the sea. So how do we deal with this tension? Because we are looking at the three pillars of sustainability, which is economy, societal coherence, and as well as environmental sustainability. And we need to find ways to deal with this tension in such a way that we could actually continue to enjoy our beautiful planet, especially when you and Andy present that picture of the ocean seen from the outer space. I think it's one of the most beautiful places that you can think of. So with that, I would like to invite our next speaker, Professor Dr. David Smith, to come forward and to tell us, what he thinks it would be important in dealing with the, I would not say pending, but it's already existing crisis, but it's not less felt or directly experienced unless you live on the island or you go to the ocean often. A few words about David. He's the director of the Center for Environmental Management. He's part of the University of West Indies. Besides coordinating and direct the activities and research of Center for Environmental Management, he has also been very active at the international level. He was an author of the United Nations Global Sustainable Development Report. And also has been part of the process in terms of the Science and Policy Advisory Committee of the Inter-American Institute for Global Change Research, and is the Caribbean chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He focused his own energy on environmental management, especially about disaster risk and the effects of climate change on human well-being, many in the small island developing states. And David has a PhD in zoology, and also he has been working at the regulatory policy level as his major part of a career. So the floor is yours, David. Please take us forward in terms of your reflection.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen. And let me put the hopefully everybody can see what I have up. Great. And I just want to thank Fabienne for pointing out the sources of information, both the Global Sustainable Development Report, but also the Sustainable Development Solutions Network's dashboard and index. They're very useful sources of information. The Sustainable Development Report points out, though, that if we're trying to move towards those Sustainable Development Goals, there are 4 things that are probably worldwide affecting progress. One is waste, and our particular focus today is probably on waste that ends up in oceans, but also ends up in the fish in the oceans, and recent scientific evidence has shown it ends up in our bodies as well. We knew it was part of our diet, but now we also have evidence that it becomes incorporated into our tissues. So we have to be careful what we throw away, and what we often throw away is not in the oceans itself, but often in the rivers that lead to the oceans. Inequality is also important because it makes a barrier to human well-being and causes all kinds of problems in terms of ensuring that some people may not achieve the goals, even though other people in their country or community does. And inequality increases after repeated adverse events. We've got climate change, which we've spoken about as well as biological diversity loss, so losing animals and plants within the oceans and in the coastal zone. One thing we should bear in mind is that as adverse events increase, that increases inequality, and increased inequality increases vulnerability. It decreases human capital and decreases social capital and makes us less likely to achieve the goals. So let's talk not so much about the open ocean. I think that's been covered very nicely by my 2 previous colleagues, but let's talk a bit about that where the ocean meets the land, the coastal development. And I want to just raise a couple of red flags as we think about the blue economy. A lot of infrastructure that is highly important and vital to our economies is in the coastal zone and exposed to hazards. I'll talk a little about airports later on, but lest you think that this is a problem just of small island developing states or developing countries, bear in mind that JFK Airport in New York is right there on the sea, and the airport runways are not very high in terms of their elevation, and a lot of airport runways around the world are really close to areas where they're going to be affected by sea level rise. But within islands and within tropical states, which are usually tourism dependent, we find a great deal of infrastructure again, a great deal of economic activity, low levels of diversity in terms of the players within that, which increases the vulnerability to shocks. What happens very often then is that a highly dependent on tourism economy, when it's hit by, say, a hurricane or something, recovers sometimes very slowly. But also what happens is that you find that sometimes there's no recovery at all because of high levels of foreign ownership. And so when the major economy sector gets hit, people may just take their insurance money and say, hey, I'm not going to bother with that anymore. The effect on livelihoods is often neglected in favor of measures to support recovering the industry, but sometimes that forgets that what's really important are the livelihoods of the people who work there, as opposed to the industry itself. So we should pay attention to vulnerable economic assets like hotels built on beaches, coastal roads, and low elevation airport runways, either built beside the sea or built on floodplains. I come from a country and live in a country which is often characterized as paradise, which many of our small island states are, many of our tropical countries are. We all often have high dependence on tourism. Some of the most tourism-dependent economies are small states, but we spend little money on conserving or managing the coastal ecosystems that support that economic activity. And it is subject to high cost and high levels of erosion, which has been exacerbated by climate change and sea level rise. Tourism-based economies, especially the tourism that depends on natural resources, needs to pay a lot more attention to supporting the resources that make that economy survive. And we should apply that to the blue economy as we begin to expand more and more into our oceans and more into creating an economy that is dependent on the natural resources of the ocean. If we are going to increase a blue economy, we must also increase the measures that ensure that that blue economy is sustainable. What we might consider, at least for the coastal zone, and let me first talk about the picture to the right. There is actually a beach under that brown mess of sargassum seaweed. It's a very beautiful beach, or was a very beautiful beach before the seaweed came in. This is a picture of a beach in Antigua and Barbuda. It's a tourism beach, or was. The sargassum that is inundating it and that regularly inundates beaches in the Caribbean and Central America comes from the Southern Atlantic. And it's very likely that the blooms of sargassum are fueled by agricultural inputs in South America and Southern Africa. Those agricultural inputs get into rivers and get into the ocean. They cause a bloom of sargassum, which is a naturally occurring seaweed, but has grown to enormous size because of these inputs. And then they move from the Southern Atlantic and inundate beaches all over the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. That's a global problem, but it's not a problem that somebody who owns this beach can solve, because they have no influence on the agriculture in South America and South Africa. And this is one of the things that we need to start thinking about, is how these kinds of problems are interconnected and require a lot more working together in teams than we are accustomed to. We are going to be having to look at transdisciplinary teams, multidisciplinary teams, and multinational cooperation to address ocean issues on a level that we've never done before. That's going to tax the UN system, it's going to tax our national systems, and it's going to enforce us to start cooperating with each other a lot more and in ways we never used to do before. Just to protect beaches, I threw up some possible policies there on the left, which basically boil down to charging sufficient rent to the people who are making money from the use of those beaches to be able to protect the ecosystems that make sure that those beaches persist. And that's the sort of general rule which we might need to look at if we are looking at economies that are based on natural resources. If we are in a situation where we get our economic value from natural resources, we need to be able to be resilient to external shocks. And I just threw down a few potential shocks There are meteorological ones, things like droughts and major cyclones. There's also things like volcanoes and oil spills, which we've heard about as well. We obviously are aware of pandemics, and I just spoke about algal blooms, and of course the economic shocks on the right as well. And of course, unfortunately, we have to highlight war at this time, because the effects of war, regardless of where that war may be taking place, are often much larger than the theater of the war itself. This is to remind us that even though we talk about disasters that often relate to things like tropical storms, many of our tropical countries and islands are subject to a whole suite of disasters as well. And these are pictures from last year's volcanic eruption in St. Vincent. In order, though, to create resilience and to build resilient communities, to build resilient people, we need money, and often the money that is required is unavailable to the countries that need it through a combination of things like high interest rates and unfavorable interest regimes, the inability to qualify for beneficial rates of payback and so on. So we do need to look at the way in which we finance resilience, not just in the Global Climate Fund, but in many of our different funds which are intended to help states improve their resilience. And that's not just me talking, that's actually the IMF saying. In the bottom there, they say you've got to improve access to funds and reduce administrative hurdles. Bearing in mind as well that you shouldn't be using GDP or GDP per capita as a way of deciding whether you can access funds or not, because it's not a measure of human well-being. And again, I'm not saying that. At least 2 Nobel Prize winning economists have said that from as far back as 2009. We need to bear in mind that climate change is unequal in its effects, and also that climate change has started to affect tropical and subtropical countries first, before the rest of the world. As time goes on, we will see more and more climate change effects being manifested both on land and in marine environments, but it doesn't all start at one time. And so we should be paying a lot more attention to what's going on in the tropical countries. Money is needed for mitigation and adaptation. We also need to look at how we are working through how we pay for the different actions that we want to take. Recent work that we did with IDB showed that in the case of one particular country, their own government funds were much more used to pay for climate change adaptation than money that they could get from international sources. And this was in a small island developing state with not very much money. To finance resilience in developing countries, then, we need to think of a few things. One is that most of those developing countries suffer from high indebtedness, and that they are often subject to economic and financial setbacks from shocks that they have absolutely no control over. In the same way that, for example, that sargassum gets onto our beaches and we have no control over it. So disaster funds, catastrophic instruments, catastrophic clauses in debt arrangements, budgetary allocations, and parametric insurance are all very important, but we need to figure out ways to tailor-make those to specific needs of different countries in different development situations. There is no one size fits all. But we need to work with each other to figure out what sizes might fit. Businesses often have very good ways of being able to avoid risk, insurance, they have continuity plans, but many of these plans are done by larger business, multinationals as well, but not by smaller businesses. So we have to figure out ways of supporting those businesses. Being insured, by the way, does not mean that the hotel, restaurant, or business will come back, nor does it mean that the livelihoods will come back after the event. There are many instances of situations where people just simply take the insurance money, and that doesn't mean they're coming back. It might be the best business decision to simply walk away. So how do we build resilience? How do we take care of disaster risk in situations where we suffer many different kinds of events that are likely to affect us? The first thing is build human capital. That creates the means for economic diversification. It means you're not vulnerable to one particular kind of way of building the economy. And it means that people are much more flexible. A lot of work has been done on the importance of education in resilience to disasters and flexibility. Conserve natural capital. Manage the ecosystems that support you and use natural means to build that resilience. Supplement those means with engineering when necessary. Support small businesses and help them to access capital and means of reducing risk. And ensure that whatever infrastructure we build from here on in is built bearing in mind the kinds of things that we know are likely to happen. And I invite us to have a good conversation after my next colleague presents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for being professional, a professor, keeping the time. I mean, very impressed. I didn't even have to remind you of the time. But thank you very much to make a link between the state of the ocean and also the overall situation of global warming and climate change. And I think also your reminder in terms of the ripple effect or consequences is very long. So we cannot really sort of just think about oceans without looking at the larger pictures. And I also thought, the man-made behavior or the human behavior also has an impact in terms of what is happening in terms of the state of ocean. For example, fishery is such an important item, which Dr. Han will be coming in to talk about. How does IUU affecting livelihood of many individuals? To tell them not to fish, it's a non-starter. So I see that SDG agenda, from all different angles, it's really about using policies, using international agreements to mitigate the tension between these different demands. And I think I would like to come back to you later when we come to the general question and answer period. And in the process, I will hand over the microphone to Peter. Peter, he's the professor from Cornell University, and I enjoys a very interesting title, Dwight Webster Sesquicentennial Faculty Fellow. I was all impressed once I checked on the Google how long that means. It's 150 years. But the reason why I'm particularly happy that Peter McIntyre is here with us to address the linkages between SDG 14 and SDG 15, to look at how does the ecosystem of the fresh water on land, including inland countries and ocean, are connected together. And he has a particular perspective because he's also doing global studies in terms of fishery in major lakes and rivers. So with this, a few short introduction words, I would like to invite Peter to take over and to give us your observation and insight in terms of the interlink between different water systems in the ocean or on land. At the same time, how does that, affecting the nutrition level of people, including countries who are on the coast, and why there's a greater pressure in terms of the demographic change and increasing population of the world.
Thank you so much, Licha. And are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Well, it's a privilege to join this group and to follow David. I'm going to try to offer a perspective that kind of in the spirit of his moving onto land, I'm going to now take us onto the major continental land masses to talk about inland fisheries and ecosystems and the challenges that they face. So I'm going to be referring to, I'll show pictures sometimes, but most of the time I'll show graphics from various researchers. But the context is the sort of situations that you see here. So the reality is that there are many hundreds of millions of people on all continents that rely not only on ocean fisheries, but also on inland fisheries. And so these are a few pictures I've taken over the years doing my research on various continents. And so the context here is really that when we look at the SDGs, there's inland waters are largely overlooked. That's from an ecosystem standpoint, it's from a biodiversity standpoint, it's from a natural capital standpoint and a fisheries use perspective. And so as we think about something like SDG 14, SDG 6 makes some kind of alludes to water quality and quantity, but not the resources and natural diversity and capital that exist in those ecosystems. And SDG 14 almost entirely overlooks inland waters. And so I want to just open with this sort of landmark study that was done more than a decade ago now, that revealed by integrating many, many different aspects of the threats that inland waters face. So thinking about local habitat disruption, that's from changes in the landscape, the hydrological alteration. This was a focus on rivers, so we're talking about dams and other structures that modify the world's rivers. Chemical pollution, both that comes in via the atmosphere and that which is locally derived, it sort of washes downstream, as David was discussing. Species invasions, fishing pressure. When you add all of that together, you end up with the map that you see before you. And so in this case, high threat levels integrated across these many different sorts of stressors. High threat levels are in red and low threat levels are in blue. And this is a relative map. It's not the absolute intensity. It's relative to all other parts of the world. The red areas, which prominently include North America, Western Europe, South Asia, and East Asia, are facing really profoundly altered river ecosystems, very high threat to any organisms that live in those systems. But the threats aren't restricted only to highly developed economies. There are many parts of Africa, South America, and throughout Asia that face such challenges. And so I want to really highlight three major challenges that to think about in freshwater. So the first is what is truly a crisis in biodiversity conservation. So that the diversity of freshwaters is really remarkable. And I love this graphic because it shows that this is the world's water. 97% of it is salt water. Only 3% of it is freshwater. So think about that. Humans and all freshwater organisms are dependent on the little tip of the wave. You know, all the rest of the world's water is salty or frozen. And then when we are then looking at fisheries, about half of that comes from the ocean. This is 2016 statistics, so freshwater has actually become more important rather than less important in the last 7 years. So, but roughly half of global fisheries come from the ocean. The other half are from inland waters, and it's about 10% come from capture fisheries. That's wild fish that are harvested from lakes and rivers, and it's now almost a half of all fish harvested, or actually just over half of all fish harvested are from aquaculture, and the large majority of that aquaculture is in inland waters, in rivers and lakes. So I'm going to give you some stories about the biodiversity crisis, about the distribution and needs of wild fisheries in rivers and lakes. And then finally, I'm going to just touch on sustainable aquaculture, because this aquaculture segment is growing so fast and becoming so economically important. Okay, so from the biodiversity perspective, I'll be brief here. This is our map. The best available map is from 2014. I'm part of a big project that's been working on an upgraded map, but it basically looks like this. You can see very high diversity in throughout the tropical belt, and then in a few more temperate regions. So this is the distribution of all species. This is the distribution of threatened species. So the IUCN has this procedure called the red list that allows evaluation of individual species. And so when you add up across all those species that have been evaluated by experts from around the world, this is the map of threatened species. And this map actually has a lot of biases in it because the information available for the experts to review is quite biased in its distribution. But we can see the bottom line is we can see that there's actually quite a mismatch to the locations of biodiversity, but we can't forget about the biases that figure into these mapping exercises. And so if we now just take an overview of this biodiversity crisis, what's going on is a combination of habitat loss, pollution, and harvest overexploitation that have led to the threatened status. This is just for fish and large crustaceans, crabs and crayfish and things like that. There's 1,674 species that are assessed to be threatened by the experts, and those major threats are just loss of habitat, chemical pollution of the habitat, and human harvest. And this is true across lakes, wetlands, and rivers. So these are the three big categories of inland waters. Lakes, wetlands, and rivers, they all have very high threat levels. So at least 20% of the species in each of these habitat classes is considered threatened. So I want to close out the biodiversity challenge by just mentioning a very recent study on climate change impacts. And so this is a projection out to, I believe, 2050 for water temperatures. And if we allow, this is for 11,500 fish species. So here's the global map of where blue is areas where the fish species are not particularly, where climate change wouldn't cause them to lose very much of their geographic range. And the yellow and reds are areas where climate change is likely to substantially restrict the geographic range of the fish that you find in that area. Now this map on the right is if the fish were able to move freely through the world's river networks. But the reality is that there are hundreds of thousands, actually likely many millions of dams that block the movement of fish within those river corridors. And so this is the more realistic view that you can see when you account for dams that prevent fish from adapting on their own to moving to find a location that's more habitable given shifts in water temperature, that intersection between the species that have very limited ranges and whether they'll be able to move given the location of dams and given the rates of warming, the geographic variation in rates of water warming, paints a very ugly picture. And so this next slide gives us an idea. This is the amount of water temperature projected to change. So these are just different scenarios. So let's say that we're somewhere between 2 degrees and 3.2 degrees is, let's just call that the realistic range right now. This is relative to pre-industrial temperatures. And then this no dispersal scenario is the most realistic one. So at 2 degrees, the world's fish, or about 20% of the range of fish will be threatened. At 3.2 degrees, more like 40% of the range of the world's freshwater fish species will be threatened. It's hard to overstate how significant that would be. So I now want to switch to fisheries. So this is the human exploitation of fish. It takes many, many forms around the world. Often we think about commercial use, market harvest and sale, but in fact, I'm going to tell you stories largely about subsistence utilization of inland fisheries. Of course, there's also recreation, and then as a niche market for aquarium fisheries. And the context here, you'll probably hear more about this from one of the upcoming speakers, but the broad context is that people rely on fish for nutrition. It's not just protein. In fact, there are many, many nutrients: zinc, iron, vitamin A, vitamin B12, and then the famous omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, that are critical for neurological development, for brain health, basically. So this is the set of nutrients that fish are especially notable for. So you could eat a lot of chicken or beef or pork or whatever is desirable and culturally appropriate, and you have very low ingestion of these brain healthy fatty acids, because those fatty acids actually originate in aquatic ecosystems. And so as we assess the role of fish in nutrition, they really play a special role. It's not only the magnitude of fish harvest, it's also the nutrients that are in those fish. They're also critically important for livelihoods. So these are our marine fishery statistics, but for every person that's directly involved in fisheries, there are another 3 people who are indirectly involved in the sale and distribution of those fish. And then the family dependence is another 4-fold multiplier. So very quickly, we end up with estimates that are pushing 1 billion people. This is, again, a marine focus. There's no analogous statistics available for freshwater fisheries. They'd be smaller than this, but still very substantial. So livelihood impacts are enormous. And so when we look at the distribution of inland fisheries, this is our kind of best guess map. We can again see the peaks, the warm colors in the tropical belt. And what I want to emphasize is the distribution of these benefits is very heterogeneous. So here's our GDP per capita spectrum, and acknowledging David's important point that GDP per capita has little to do with human happiness. In this case, we're just thinking about kind of a spectrum of national economic power. And this is the per capita catch from the world's countries. And so essentially, if we look at low-income nations, there are many of them that have very high per capita catches. And the size of these circles is the proportion of animal protein consumed in those countries that is derived from freshwater fish. Cambodia is the outlier here. It's about 50% of animal protein consumed in the nation of Cambodia is from inland fisheries. And then how dark the circle is the proportion of children that are underweight. So this is a simple metric of malnourishment within each of these countries. And so you can see that there's sort of a syndrome. There's a lot of countries on the left end of the GDP spectrum, so low-income countries, that have high per capita catches, depend a lot on inland fish for protein, and face profound challenges with food security, high proportions of underweight children. And so taking that same economic activity spectrum here, we can look at where can we place freshwater fisheries, aquaculture, and marine fisheries statistically. So this is essentially mapping all of the world's consumption of fish from these 3 different sources across this economic spectrum. And you can see freshwater fish are the outlier. To make a blanket generalization, the world's poor rely far more on inland fisheries than they do on aquaculture or on marine fisheries. And that's all based on the Food and Agriculture Organization statistics. There's been some recent research showing that this is a set of 42 countries. This is the official FAO reported statistics through time of how much fish is harvested in those 42 countries. This is the estimate from 500,000 household surveys in those 42 countries. And so the take-home point here is that comparing that number to this estimate in the year 2008 is sort of the benchmark year here, that 1 in 3 fish that are caught from the world's rivers and lakes go unreported. So the point of this slide is simply there are tens of millions of people whose nutrition depends on fish that aren't even recorded in the FAO statistics. Okay, so what's the status of these fisheries? I'm going to be very brief here and just tell you two key things. So I'm now taking this river threat map here. That's the x-axis, and this is the total inland fish catch around the world. And the fact that the actual line, this red line here, is bowed upward is telling us that the large majority of the world's inland fish catch comes from areas where the rivers are very highly threatened. So when we add up all of these stressors on river ecosystems, that's where we depend the most on fish. That's exactly the wrong answer from a sustainability standpoint, right? We don't want to be dependent upon ecosystems that are highly stressed, but in fact, we are very highly dependent on those ecosystems. And one of the hidden challenges with inland fisheries, and this is actually a difference from marine fisheries, it's a much bigger deal in inland fisheries, is mercury pollution. So the Minamata Convention provides a mechanism for addressing and helping nations to try to remediate against mercury pollution. But the truth is we don't actually know all that much about the scope of that challenge. We've got some extreme cases where it's known to be very acute, but I'm part of a big team that surveyed fisheries on 4 continents. And this is the double red line is if you're a child or a reproductive age woman and you're eating fish every day, this is the maximum amount of mercury that should be in the fish that you eat. These are the concentration of the mercury in fish. And you can see that almost every fishery we surveyed, North America, South America, Africa, and Asia, almost every one has an average fish mercury concentration that exceeds the safe consumption level on a daily basis for a child or a reproductive age woman.
Pete, I gotta interrupt you and remind you we have
Time.
The 3 to 4 more minutes, even though it's fascinating and scary. But I think I would ask you also later to put the references if you haven't done that in your slides to the chat, so people can follow and read.
Great. Well, I'm nearly done. So I'm just going to close with aquaculture here. And so this is the rise of aquaculture. This is the flatlining of global capture fisheries. Again, most of these are marine, but inland is non-trivial as well, and particularly important for subsistence. So this meteoric rise of aquaculture can't be ignored. And I just want to make sure that we have this on the table, because most of that aquaculture is happening in inland waters, but it constitutes a very strong coupling between the ocean and the freshwaters, because we go out and harvest many of these small sardines and anchovies from the world's oceans. They have low economic value, although they're quite nutritious, they have low economic value. And so a lot of these fish, this is the global harvest, this black line here, over the last 4 decades. The blue line is the use of those fish, the total amount that's used to grow aquaculture fish. So we take those little fish, we grind them up, make them into feed pellets, and then feed them to high value species in aquaculture. And so you can see first a big decline over the last 3 decades in the total harvest of these forage fish. And the forage fish they're the food base for all the marine predatory fish. So we're taking a huge quantity of these out of the ocean. It's about 1/3 of the total marine harvest is these forage fish. And then 2/3 of that is being fed to other fish, mostly inland. So the risk of depleting the forage base for our marine predators and to sustain marine ecosystems is very high. We've got some recent research using genetic tools to look at the marine fish that are present in those feeds that we've collected in 30 countries at aquaculture facilities. And sometimes we find as many as 300 different marine fish species present in a single feed pellet, the DNA from those fish. So there's a huge challenge with supply chains. These marine fisheries, this curve suggests the marine fisheries are probably not very sustainable, and yet the global rise of aquaculture is fueled by these marine fish. And finally, there's a link to greenhouse gases that is basically unknown. We know that the aquaculture facilities do generate substantial amounts of greenhouse gases, but we're just beginning to get some insight into the quantities. It could be quite a major greenhouse gas source. So that's all I've got. We need to protect rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Inland fisheries have been massively undervalued. You know, they're feeding hundreds of millions of people worldwide. And as we think about that amazing, just absolutely remarkable rise of aquaculture, we really need to be a lot more cautious before we convert all the world's lakes and rivers into aquaculture facilities. Thanks.
Wow, Peter. I think you just dropped a few bombs. we sort of intuitively knew that there are linkages, and also the intersecting, sort of cause and effect, but we didn't realize it's this big. And it's also what you said about industrial waste and how does that affect the health of the fishery, or the fishes, different species, and how has that translated into human health. So all of a sudden I can see very clearly the link to SDG 2, which is about hunger, and SDG 3 about health and well-being, and then so on and so forth. And then start thinking that what should we do to teach this to today's everyone, not just future generations, about such literacy in terms of ocean, in terms of our sources of food, and how we go about trying to meet our other demands and needs of life. So thank you for opening at least my eyes to this very complex phenomenon. And I would like now to invite all the speakers to join me in this next sort of a segment of 15 minutes for a general discussion. I have some questions from the participants, but I also invite you to respond to each other, because I think you are all experts in what you're doing, and your dialogue and exchange will be very interesting. So let me start by raising the first question from a very interesting but very general question. It's what is water ecosystem sustainability? How do we know, when we use a sort of naked eye without the scientific knowledge and tools, that we know the water is in trouble? So individual citizens could actually start thinking or get together or sound the alarm. So, what would you say to answer the question raised by Maida Lin Jagui? No, what does that mean when we say, the ecosystem of the water and the ocean is sustainable?
I think it would be maybe that the livelihoods of people that depend on that water is not getting worse and worse. An example might be in many parts of small island states, we know that the fish that we catch today is not the amount of fish that our parents or grandparents used to catch. That might be one way. So
from daily experience of our interaction with the ocean, we could know. Okay, thank you, David, for that. I saw Fabienne is nodding the head. You want to also come in to answer that question? Your microphone is not on.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do also think that looking at the indicators from the SDGs, they have defined, for instance, with regard to pollution, in terms of the density of floating debris. So, for instance, in the Mediterranean Sea, which is now considered in terms of the streams and the accumulation zone of marine debris, it's quite visible actually, because it's macroplastics and not just micro size, because of the closeness to the shore. So it's actually quite a a visible form of pollution that people can see to the naked eye and detect that. And so all these forms of pollutions or also species abundance, I think in terms of a healthy, resilient ecosystem, the healthier biodiversity is and abundance, the healthier the ecosystem, because of all the different roles of the individual species across the food webs. So if this integrity is granted, then we could consider also the ecosystem as being healthy and resilient in a very sort of generic term. But I'm sure the other panelists have much better ideas as well.
Peter, you raised your hand.
Well, I guess a kind of simple, for inland waters, a simple practical definition is basically if you can smell it, you shouldn't be able to smell the water. So if you can smell the water, or if there's evidence that you get sick from drinking the water or from getting into the water, then you know you have a real problem. And because all life depends on water, individual humans, and then all the life that's in the water, and freshwater resources are so limited, if you can smell it, or if you can't drink it or get into it safely, then we can very easily recognize without any science that there's a profound problem there. There's so many of these hidden threats that we've been discussing, but you know, I found David's beach covered in sargassum a poignant example. I mean, your eyes are telling you that there's a problem with the system. And with fresh water, you shouldn't be able to smell it.
I very much in line with our three of you, Pete, David, and Fabienne's comment, saying that our own human senses and using common sense, we should be easily see what's going on with our environment. And I think one unanswered question is really, what can I do about this as an individual if I'm poor, without much skills and very limited mobility? What would be the option? And I recall Kofi Annan's foundation, when they first started, the first research was talking about climate refugee, but I think we probably could broaden the concept now to eco refugees. And that means that, that creates many other tensions, which is beyond the scope of our discussion. So I would like to sort of follow up on the a question by Evelyn Fantilana to everyone, and starting with David, which you can combine your answers together with the first question, is what can governments do differently, and how could business actually contribute to resolve some of these challenges?
I think governments need to build on some of the work that's already started in terms of things like large marine ecosystems and trying to cooperate with each other. And that, I think, is particularly important in riverine systems. We kind of recognize that because we know that if the people upriver do something bad, then we suffer. And so we try to influence people upstream from us. But we also need to do that within the oceans as well. But even though we don't recognize necessarily which way oceans might flow. And that is something which we need to get to be, I think, much better at, is sharing data, collecting and making those things freely available, and actually meaningfully working with each other to address some of these problems. A simple example would be that the spiny lobster that we catch in the Western Caribbean was spawned in the Eastern Caribbean. So if we don't help the islands and states to our east manage their ecosystem, then it will directly affect us. And similarly, for those who are in the east, they need to as well look at the origins of this. We do have to have a much more global cooperation for managing aquatic systems.
Well, thank you, David. I was just, making a mistake in terms of addressing, and I'm glad that you came in already talking about collaboration. So I want to give the floor to Andy. to sort of to address both questions in one go.
Yeah. Some very interesting answers there, and they've sparked various things that. But I think firstly, in terms of the sort of sustainable ecosystem, I think really, if we've got a sustainable ecosystem, then that's an ecosystem that's maintaining its biodiversity and its functional groups, so they're all interacting effectively. It's productive, obviously, and then also it's that regulating environment. It's maintaining its biogeochemical cycling, etc. Particularly the ocean I'm referring to here. But in the normal cycle of things, that ecosystem can stand certain perturbations, natural perturbations. But what we've got to try and get to is that there will be, and we are having sort of impacts on our ocean, so we're perturbating that ocean. So hopefully we can try and do that, minimize that, so that they still functioning in the way I've just described. There's various ways in terms of, I think scientific knowledge and capacity is very, very important in terms of what we're talking about here. You mentioned as well about implementing treaties earlier on. I think that's very, very important. And we need to mobilize. I think David just says the sort of global mobilization to achieve these things. And the public is one of the things that is essential to that. And it's probably not any coincidence that we're seeing the increase in focus on the oceans that we are today, because of that increase in focus and the exposure that people have got and their interest. And they can get involved, in terms of monitoring of citizen science is a huge thing now. I used to be involved in that many moons ago in projects recording biodiversity with the public and undertaking marine scientific data collection analysis, and that's seen that grow over the years, and that's instilled the knowledge and the enthusiasm. But then that promotes political pressure, which is what we need for the governments to implement treaties. So I think that's very, very important. And again, in terms of the financing of this as well, we've got to incentivize not only the governments to implement treaties, but support that with the financial institutions, and we see that happening. There's a lot of things. A good example is the coalition to protect 30% of the world's ocean by 2030. A lot of that is being supported by World Bank funding and those to support projects. So I think it is a global effort, and I think we need to certainly step it up, and hopefully this year, very important year for the oceans, to 50 years since the Stockholm Convention, also 50 years since the London Convention came into existence. So I think that momentum is there. I think we just need to capitalize on it.
Well, very good points made, and I think that also bridged nicely in terms of what are we taking seriously about different targets being sort of agreed upon in the SDG 17, which is looking at various means of implementation. And I will just wanted to, because we have 3 more speakers, so I would have one last question, and hopefully that you would address them very quickly and very shortly. Is, we know what is happening in the high seas. People won't be there most of the time to watch, to smell, to touch, and to be part of that. So what happens for things that, for instance, the companies, private business, doing certain things in the commons, the global commons? What can we do to incentivize them, to not just thinking about profit maximization, but also think of their role in keeping the health of our global world that we call home. So I would start with Peter, please.
I freely admit I don't have a lot of perspective on strategies for the high seas, but I would point to the kind of transboundary water issues that David brought up in the marine context certainly apply to river systems. And so very often you have a problem of degradation of a system upstream, which has huge impacts on all the people living downstream. Yeah. And so that kind of coordination but the invisibility problem that large populations in the lower reaches of rivers are unaware of the insults to those rivers upstream until it starts to degrade the resources that they count upon. It's a real problem and requires international solutions.
Thank you. David?
I think you raised an important issue. Unfortunately, I'm not sure there are any quick answers, but just want to reiterate how very important that question you raised is for small island developing states, particularly those in the Pacific, because they have very, very large areas of economic zones which they manage, but which are often predated on by distant ocean fleets that come into their waters and take out very valuable stocks, but they lack the capacity, because they're small states, to be able to regulate these things. And that requires international cooperation. We do need to figure out ways of the tuna you buy in this urban center in the OECD that was actually fished in Samoa's waters. How do you know it was fished legally? It can't be because you're expecting the government of Samoa or Fiji or the Solomon Islands to certify this all. And that's a really big gap.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that comment. And I was just trying to visualize how do we send drones into the ocean so we could sneak on, have a peek in terms of what these fishing fleets are doing. But anyway, that's a bit science fiction. So I will lead to Fabienne and see what you think about it. What can citizens and civil society organizations, how can we do something to have a little bit of a pressure on more responsible business conduct on the multinational fishery companies and the citizens?
Thank you so much for this excellent question and very prescient and urgent question. It's basically more timely than ever because we are in the final stride of this high seas treaty, and it's exactly these questions that are being addressed in terms of the treaty will cover, for instance, marine genetic resources and benefit sharing and capacity building in terms of technology transfer, etc. So it's ingrained in exactly this treaty. And from our side, we have followed this. It has been now 20 years in the making for this treaty to hopefully now reach its finishing line this summer. And so from our perspective, it is the contribution of expertise and findings, because we do have the capacity also as civil society organizations to delve into an issue in such depth and for such a long time with leading experts and scientists, and bringing together governments and facilitating dialogues. And really, because we can only do this all together, it really needs every single stakeholder. And I think we have this role also as a watchdog in being in the room, if we are then allowed to, that we are in the room and listen to the deliberations and share the perspectives, and also give voices to those that cannot be there in the room as representatives of civil society, and highlight issues about the importance of indigenous knowledge in looking at scientific evidence base from a wide spread of sources. And I think maybe in one final point is that I think regulatory measures can be such a big chance as well. It always sounds, I think also maybe for the private sector, as a prohibiting factor, but I think it's also an enabling factor, because it also provides much more transparency and a level playing field. So I think these are exciting developments happening right now, where every stakeholder can play an important role.
Yeah, there is a marine sort of certification of good behavior. However, from the chart that Peter was sharing, I'm not so sure the speed of that good behavior is fast enough to actually make any difference. So since I'm coming to Andre, since you are working on the treaty level, trying to prevent dumping, trying to to promote good behavior, what do you think that would actually accelerate the behavior, the change of behavior, so that we could actually see slowing down, mitigate the risk threat scenario that Pete was putting up earlier?
I see this more in terms of a more general in the health of the oceans, and then enforcing and implementing the ocean treaties, and hopefully the ones that will be being developed in the near future. Yeah, I mean it's a difficult question, particularly on the high seas. But for instance, all the IMO treaties and conventions are implemented throughout the oceans, because it's not just in the jurisdiction of the member states in their ocean space, but also on the high seas, because it's enforced through the flag state of the vessels and also the port state. So for instance, the London Convention, the London Protocol, the Dumping Convention, they apply throughout. So I think we are certain within that one. We don't see much high seas activity, but other activities under MARPOL, such as discharges and things, could well be affected there. And we're seeing again technology in terms of those issues, sort of discharges. We're seeing increased satellite imagery, which can act as enforcement, things like that. But we really want to ensure that those people, those organizations, those companies who are doing that activity out on there are responsible. And I think hopefully we can encourage them to be there, certainly in the future. And a lot of I mentioned the banks and things. A lot of the financing now, it's really important for these companies to get financing based on their environmental credentials and their implementation of certain treaties, and the way they do behave in their activities. So hopefully that's sort of a pressure that I think fishing's slightly different, but
yeah. I think
that's
the reason why international community continues to work on treaties and trying to bring sort of clarity and sort of the right way of behaving and so on and so forth. And I saw that Pete has your hands up. So 1 minute, please.
Less than a minute. Just satellites and genetics. I mean, I never think that the answer is just more science, but these tools the changes in the last decade have been absolutely revolutionary in what we can see from the sky and what we can discern from genes. So anything that becomes traded, you can do genetic analysis of, and you can watch from the sky truly anything with low price satellites today.
Yeah, and thank you for this comment. Science and education, and I think that is a strong link, and we also have to re-examine in terms of our schooling, the school curriculum for the young people, for adults, for mature people. What is actually happening in our day-to-day life, so that will start to become relevant and meaningful and send messages for action. And I think only that way we could do something, because trying to catch somebody behaving badly is not an easy undertaking. So with that note, I wanted to sort of thank you, four of you, to be here with us. And I know, Peter, you also have other things that you have to attend to. And also, I wish you all a happy holiday coming. And once again, I would encourage, if you're staying with us, please look at the chat so that people can actually get some of their individual questions addressed, and also leave us some other references that you have not looked at or mentioned until this point. And with these few words, I thank you, And I wanted to invite the next speaker, Dr. Han, who is a jurist, to address the question of IUU. The irregular, unregulated, and unreported fishing, which is a very big issue, which threatens of our ocean security and sustainability. So Dr. Peter Han, he's the Director General for Center for International Development Cooperation of the Korean Maritime Institute. He is a lawyer and has been specializing in international trade law, international commerce law, international law, and Korean law on maritime and fisheries, oceans, and fishery development corporations. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Han so that he could actually tell us how to put international agreement into and regulation into practice through the example of IUU. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Dr. Han, for being with us.
Okay. Thank you so much, Chair, for your nice introduction. Let me share my presentation. Just a moment. Can you see my presentation? Okay.
Not yet. It's coming.
Not yet.
Mr. Han, we are seeing your internet browser.
Yes.
May I suggest that Jean would run it on your behalf?
Oh, yeah. If you can do, I really appreciate it. Okay.
Well, there we go. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Chair, for your nice introduction, Chair. As you introduced me, my name is Deukhoon Peter Han, and I am Director General for Center for International Development Cooperation at the Korean Maritime Institute, KMI. I'm very pleased and honored to participate in this important executive training course. And today I will introduce Korea's recent effort on combating IUU fishing activities. Before I touch on my topic, I would like to briefly introduce KMI and CID, Center for International Development Cooperation, and the scope of our mission and who we are doing and what is our goal in the future direction. And then I will talk about my topic. Next, please. Next, please. One more, please. The Korean Maritime Institute is a government-funded research institute established under the Korean Prime Minister's office to contribute to the formulation of national policies in maritime and fisheries affairs to boost the related economy. KMI aims to conduct innovative and preemptive research as a policy think tank in ocean and fisheries area. Next, please. Our main work is to research and develop new policy regarding ocean and fisheries area and provide the consultation to Korean government to help them to reflect the innovative ideas and agendas in their new policies. I will just briefly talking about Center for International Development Cooperation, CID, in KMI. Next, please. Yeah, one more next, please. Whereas KMI has done various research on development cooperation, CID was established in 2017. In October 2020, CID was designated as a specialized agency for international development cooperation by Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries of Republic of Korea in accordance with the Ocean and Fisheries Development Framework Act. Next, please. Firstly, CID's main role is to research new way in oceans and fisheries development cooperation and ODA, official development assistance. And secondly, CID needs to monitor current ODA projects and support estimation and evaluation MOF's ODA projects to help achieve SDGs. And thirdly, education and networking and information sharing regarding ODA is also main function of CID. Next, please. This is one of the example of the best practice which implemented by CID. This is the Vietnam seafarer training and capacity building program. Korean government and CID provided the training ship 3,000 tonnage vessel, which was formerly a training ship of Korean Maritime and Ocean University, and we donated this vessel to Vietnam Maritime University, and we also provided the capacity building program to the students over there in close cooperation with Vietnam Maritime University. And next one. And this is KOICA's IUU fishing management training program implemented by CID. And in addition to this program, until now, we are providing some capacity building program in terms of IUU fishing in close cooperation with the World Maritime University. We call it catfish program. It is implemented very well. Next, please. I will talk about my main topic of today. I would like to begin with the policy direction of global fisheries and followed by Korea's response and policies and actions against IUU fishing, and I will present my conclusion. Next, please. The first policy direction of global fisheries. Again, next, please. One more, next, please. According to the latest biannual FAO report, SOFIA, issued in 2020, the global capture fisheries production amounted to 93 million tons in 2018, and 34.2% of fish stocks of marine fisheries worldwide were classified as overfished in 2017. Next, please. As you can see this diagram, overfishing is a big concern in worldwide. As of 2017, like I say, 34.2% of fish stocks were fished at an unsustainable level. The rate is on a steadily rising and mounting to major crisis for sustainable fisheries. But actually, fisheries, aquaculture, and seafood all are extremely important source of food and health and employment for millions of people around the world. Next, please. To reiterate the importance of global fisheries, fish account for 20% of global annual animal protein consumption. Next, please. FAO and other international organizations repeatedly report that IUU fishing is a huge problem to global fisheries resources, and it's a threat to marine ecosystem. It is reported that approximately 20 to 33% of fisheries production worldwide is from IUU fishing. In terms of SDGs, SDG 14 deal with the life below water. As we have been seeing, the target number 14.4 and 14.6 deal with IUU fishing. Next, please. FAO realized early on the importance of eradicating IUU fishing and established IPOA IUU, which stands for International Plan of Action Against IUU Fishing, and also FAO developed the Port State Measure Agreement, PSMA, and strived for the ratification worldwide. FAO is also making effort to put words into action by developing a number of relevant institutions, such as catch document schemes. Next, please. Next is Korea's action against IUU fishing. As a major fishing nation, one of the major fishing nations, Republic of Korea complied with the international standards to an extent, but was not completely IUU free. As the US and EU are Korea's major export destinations, there were three major cases that arose with these countries. However, Korea has taken these cases very seriously as an opportunity to dramatically reinforce institutions and the implementation power to combat IUU fishing. Korea had major negotiations with the EU and US in 2013 and again with the US in 2019. Next, please. The first case involved an allegation that Korean flagged vessel engaged in IUU fishing in Antarctic Ocean in Camela Convention area in 2011. After the Camela and US notified Korea of this allegation, Korea took action, but it was estimated inadequate at the time, which means it did not meet to the expectation of the international community. After that, Korea was placed on the preliminary list of IUU fishing countries by US. After making various kinds of institutional improvements, Korea was removed from the list in 2015. Next, please. In 2013, there was another round of negotiation with the EU because of Korean flagged vessels suspected IUU activities in West African waters. After taking also various institutional measures, Korea was able to conclude these talks very smoothly in 2015 as well. To deal with these issues, Korea had to negotiate with the EU DG Mare many times. Korea reviewed and estimated the legal systems and implementing frameworks from the basic and revised it in close consultation with the EU authorities. EU's IUU regulations and enforcement system was a great reference to Korea at the time. Next, please. The third case is related to the US and Camela Convention area in 2017. US raised objection to Korea over illegally obtained toothfish in the area. Korea revised and added new financial and administrative penalty provisions to the Distant Water Fisheries Development Act and took action on the fisheries operators in question to make possible more swift punishment to IUU regulation violators. The act was amended to include administrative fines in addition to criminal sanctions. As a result, Korea was notified that it was off the list in September 2019. Next, please. Let me explain Korea's response and countermeasures one by one. First of all, the most important action was to amend Distant Water Fisheries Development Act to incorporate PSMA. Korea ratified...
Excuse me, Peter, I will need to hurry you, so you will have a very limited time left. How about concluding 3 to 5 minutes, or 3 minutes will be better. So we have some space for questions. Sorry about it.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me. So just I will briefly go over and then try to conclude my presentation. So Korean authorities and Korean this important act was revised, incorporate PSMA, Port State Measure Agreement, and also the next one is Korean government make it obligation for operating fishing vessels in overseas to install vessel monitoring system, VMS. And also Korea adopted catch document schemes to check all the distribution stages about it is distributed and imported to the market stage very well. And also Korea reinforced the protection and then prevent all the illegal fisheries put in to come into the Korean market according to the law. So this, and then also Korean government tried to the request to the operators and fishing companies to have a safety manager in their companies to check the compliance to the labor standards for their fishing crews. So can you go over the slide to the conclusion part? Sure. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. The conclusion. One more. Next, please. Yeah, sure. This was the very important case for Korean government, and then, like I said before, we made all the obligation in the Distant Water Fisheries Development Act, and then we made a lot of obligations to the fishing companies, and my conclusion is the Korea has taken on various kind of challenges, and then actually take measures against IU fishing. But I think that this is not actually enough, and we need to do more work in the future in domestic level and international level. So this kind of laying legal framework to fight IU fishing is very important. But most important in further is to bolster enforcement capability through cooperation among relevant national organizations. And by working closely with the international communities, Korea must reduce IU fishing and engage in international collaboration to prevent IU fishing in worldwide ocean. And last but not least, Korea needs to pursue measures to share experience on fighting against IU fishing through international cooperation and many cooperative projects, including ODA projects. Actually, this is end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. But I already talked with the Mr. Lee of UNOSD, but because of other arrangement, I have to depart after this presentation. But if you have any questions, you can make questions to me at this moment, or if you have a question later, I already let the organizer know my email address, so you can contact me to my email address. Anyhow, thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Han Peter, for your very good summary in terms of what the effort that Korea has been doing in terms of reducing IUU, and really appreciate that. I wonder whether you could leave a link either now or later with Mr. Lee of UNOSD about a reference document that one can read up, because I think the experiences is very important. I also sort of venture to say that it also requires resources, not only scientific and technological know-how. So how does Korea actually master the resources to not only going sort of within the national boundary, national water, and actually also looking at how the fishing fleet I will use the word a bit provocatively, stealing other countries' fish, and falls into the IUU category. And that means that you have to really go far beyond. And I understand the satellite might be one solution that you hinted at, but it would be really interested to know more about how this could be done, and and also look at how could the SIDS countries, as David earlier mentioned, that they will have huge amount of interest to cooperate, and also short of resources. So I understand why you're also working at ODA. So if you sort of could give us some hint about that, that would be greatly appreciated.
Okay. Actually, Korea has at this moment, in terms of the deep sea fishing, Korea has around 200 fishing vessels, and then Korean fishing vessel operates mainly in South Pacific, maybe over 70% of the fishing vessel, and also some vessel is operating nearby the Peru area, and also the Camela Convention area. And previously, Korean fishing vessel operated nearby the West Africa waters, but in these days, very few vessels is operating over there. So what I want to talk about is, I introduced about some revision and amendment of the Korean Distant Water Fisheries Development Act. But I think the reinforcement and then the make strong the law is important, or something like the heighten the level of penalty in terms of criminal penalty or administrative penalty is of course important in terms of deterrence effect. But also it is very important the recipient of the law. I mean some fishers, fishing companies, or local fishers. The role is very important. I mean if they do not agree, or if they don't have the common sense or common understanding, the importance of abide by the IU regulation is very weak. This kind of law cannot effectively enforced. So I think the common understanding is very important. It can also, I am looking at some question from the chatting box, but there was some important, the question is over there, the small island developing countries, in terms of their the perspective is how can they address IU fishing. I would like to comment about this one because a couple of years ago, our institution had a seminar with in cooperation with the Fiji and Kiribati in Fiji, and at the time the conclusion was the capacity building program's importance. So I think I slightly talked about the observer program to monitoring the fishing companies, the catch limit, or their legal catches over there. But the capacity building and support for the observer program in the South Pacific Island or Pacific Island, because their space is very broad. So their capacity building is very important. That is my perspective.
So if you can give us a link of this record of the past workshop, we would really appreciate that. And then I also, even though, love to continue this type of conversation a little further, because it's one less known aspect to the general participant or citizens, about the sort of the intricacy of managing the IUU. But I have to shift attention now to our last, our two lady speakers that will come after you and dealing with very specific issues concerning the ocean conservation. So thank you very much, Peter, for being with us. Let me take the floor to introduce Erica Reyes. who's the Chief Operations Officer for the Plastic Flamingo in the Philippines. The Plastic Flamingo is a very interesting and exciting business initiative that will contribute to the dealing with the plastic pollution issues in our oceans, or also in our waterways, also on land. So, and they are translating, moving into a circular business model, and they transform the plastics waste into something economically valuable. So we are here listening to your story. Eric, please take the floor.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much as well in inviting me in this presentation. So let me share my screen. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the plastic flamingo, or the PLAF. So right now we are plastic recyclers. We started just a collection point partners, just collecting plastic waste here in Manila. As you can see here in the photos, this is our products. This is made out of 100% recycled waste plastics. Last year, it's the eco lumbers that we launched. It's made out of HDPE, LDPE, PP, fair amount of sachets, and PET. And this too, this is the eco boards that we call. We just launched it like this March. This is alternative to plywood. So this one is more on made out of soft plastic, which is the sachets and pouches and other films like HDPE and LDPE films. So 80% of the total global mismanaged marine plastic waste is in Southeast Asia, and 33% of which is in the Philippines. More than 1,000 rivers account for the 80% of the global river and plastic emissions into the ocean. And the Philippines is the third for the total amount of mismanaged marine plastic waste. That's the reason why the pilot project is in the Philippines. Our mission is to reduce plastic pollution through maximum social impact. We're not an NGO but we are a social enterprise company. So we are a profit company. So here is what we do. We call it PLAF Loop. First is we will partner with organizations, schools, villages, condominiums, malls, and other organizations like business offices as well. And then we will collect all plastic waste and deliver it into our facility. From our facility, we will sort it per type. Each type of plastic waste are being converted or getting into recycling lines. Actually, this one is a quite old version of our PLAF loop. Last year, for the eco lumbers, it's HDPE, LDPE, PP, fair amount of sachets, and PET. But we've noticed that we are collecting a lot of soft plastics like pouches and multi-layered packagings and other films. So, and that's the reason why we ended up in adding a new recycling line, which is the eco boards. And then, hopefully this April, we can launch an additional recycling line, which is the pelletizing line as well. So this will be introduced to FMCG partners that they can reduce the usage of virgin plastics instead of reusing our recycled pellets instead of using 100% virgin plastics in their formulations. So we are targeting a circular economy here. Once they don't, we are selling our lumbers or our products, but after this, we can also design some projects. Like last year, we have finished or launched the eco shelter, the demo shelter that we have. It's a transitional shelter made out of 4 tons of plastic waste. Next is we also design some furnitures, outdoor furnitures, benches, pontoons, and others. So why this is a loop? Since once you don't want our products anymore, you can send it back to us, and then we can recycle it back into the formulation. So we collect, we sort and shred. So this year our target is 2,000 capacity, 2,000 tons capacity. But our target next year is hopefully 10,000 tons capacity. So right now we are partnering with waste pickers and junk shops, and we collect all types of plastic waste. So we are collecting plastic before getting into the ocean. And as of the moment, we are also partnering with organizations to collect plastic waste into rivers and to the waterways. We have our own in-house R&D team to improve and to create more products and improve our formulations. We have a partnership with University of the Philippines, Diliman, and we are including sachets in our mix. Actually, sachets, Philippines is considered as a sachets economy. We're in 164 million of sachets per day. And yeah, I think 53% are going in sachets into the rivers. So all of our products are tested and compliant with international standards. So as you can see here in the eco boards, you can clearly or visually see some of the brands and products that are using those plastic waste. And then this one are some of their eco boards. So what we are proud to say that these are made out of 100% recycled plastic products. That is what we are different on the other recyclers. We don't include aggregates or cements in our products but this is pure plastic waste. So what we do is we pelletized. It's into HDPE or RPP pellets to introduce FMCG to create new packagings. We extrude post planks and buttons for our eco lumbers. We compress boards for the boards is the alternative for plywood, and all of our products are durable for construction material. So we have our own in-house architect as well. Actually, our chief product officer, she's a Dutch architect. We customize projects for clients. We sold our own series of furniture. We built our own first shelter prototype. This is the actual photo of our shelter made out of 400 lumbers, equivalent to 4 tons of plastic waste. We have our own carpentry team, and we are training the skills of our team. We educate on plastic recycling, including we'd conduct webinars, seminars, educational trainings. We have a fast-growing PLAF community. We're providing jobs for low-income families. Most of our workers are coming from the low-income families. Some of them are high school graduate, but what we do is we are training them. Everyone is being trained, so because we are a social impact. We're a social enterprise, so yeah, we're focused on low-income families. We have a partnership to Alliance to End Plastic Waste, and what we can do is compensation your plastic footprint with us, increase your social impact through our impact programs, design projects with our recycled products, purchasing pellets or buying eco boards made out of this plastic waste, and donate a series of furniture to our local community, support raising awareness on plastic pollution, and educate and involve customers in their own plastic footprint. So yeah, I think that's all. It is just a quick one, so yeah.
Well, thank you very, Erica, for a very articulated presentation of your business model, and I'm very impressed. However, I'm going to push the envelope a little bit further, because I like your business model and can see the utility, because when we travel around, we tend to see in many of the countries, especially developing countries or the sort of ghetto areas of even developed countries, is the pile of plastic waste. So I think that your recycle and product development idea could be really replicable in many places and also connected to social impact. So in the context of sustainable development, what is your environmental footprint, especially when you do the transformation? I assume you either use heat or using high pressure or whatever methods of recombine the plastic goods into new material. So what is your record on that account? I don't mean to as a way to sort of pulling the rug, but rather thinking that if we are serious about this kind of model to be used in many other ways, then we need to also address this question.
Yeah, actually, right now in terms of plastic footprint, we are the one who is, in terms of the plastic footprint, what we count is what we collect and what we recycle, not what we just collect. So, at the moment, I think we have 200 tons of plastic waste collected, and our target this year is 2,000 tons. So we increase 2 new recycling lines just to meet the target.
Mm.
Yeah. So what we do is we have a database wherein what are the where we collect those plastic waste, and then what are the types we are diverting it, and then from that types of plastic waste, because it will enter on 2 new recycling lines. So it will be either converted to pellets, converted to lumbers, or converted to eco boards. Yeah.
Yeah, you also mentioned about the social housing shelters that you're building. So if you can leave us a link so that for interested persons to also to go in and to look at, because I think housing is another, besides waste, is another major social challenge for many countries and communities. I would just I think, if you don't mind, since we are already running behind time, I'm going to jump directly to the next speaker.
Yeah, sure.
But I want to thank you for joining us and bring in a business perspective in terms of what can be done regarding the plastic pollution and the waste. And I wish you a lot of success with your undertaking, and continue to
Thank you
grow
very
your
much.
business, so more more people will be employed, and also more communities will benefiting from your effort. So thank you once again, and to bring the business perspective. So let me switch to Madame Thaw Han from the government of Myanmar. She's the Deputy Director of Environmental Conservation Department within the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Conservation. Thaw provides coordination and management support with respect to enhancing environmental sustainability to contribute to sustainable development, among others, particularly in the area of the coastal and marine environment and freshwater resources. And she is the focal person of Myanmar to the ASEAN Working Group on Coastal and Marine Environment. So I welcome you to give us a country perspective, a government perspective, in terms of how to go about to deal with the natural resources conservation and the challenges and necessary policies required to do this job, to achieve this objective. The floor is yours. Please, Thaw. We don't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, moderator, for your kind introduction. And it is indeed a great honor for me to participate in this training course. Today, I would like to present about the addressing the marine plastic pollution in Myanmar with our limited resources to achieve the SDG 14.1. And actually, Myanmar faces a lot of challenges in addressing marine plastic pollution. So first of all, I'm going to discuss about the coastal region. Myanmar has a
Your
large.
voice faded out, so I don't.
Yes.
Okay, you're back online. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm going to present and discuss about the coastal region of Myanmar. Myanmar has a large marine territory. There are 2,810 32 kilometers of coastline and 3 coastal regions. Myanmar is blessed with the long coastline, but we face the daunting challenges. Moreover, intensive farming and aquaculture combined with rapid urbanization and industrialization, increased shipping traffic and fishing activity have resulted in deforestation, posing significant risks to the marine environment through the increase in marine debris and associated the marine pollution. And then, according to the JAMBEC in 2010, Myanmar is one of the top 20 countries in terms of mismanaged plastic, with the quality of marine plastic debris up to 0.07 to 0.18 million metric tons per year in 2010. And global first estimation made by the Lebanon Range, the Iari River, or the largest river in Myanmar, is 9th most polluted river globally. Plastic discharged roughly 100 tons by days in 2015. And then to verify the Lebanon estimation, Fauna and Flora International survey by measuring the macroplastic concentration in the area. The survey reveals that the 119 tons of plastic waste enter the Iari rivers every day, and most of the plastic, 22% of the plastics are the saccage, and then and Myanmar also faced the abandoned loss, and the discarded fishing gear is a serious threat to the marine ecosystem, damaging sensitive habitats and entangling animals of commercial and conservation concern. And Myanmar Ocean Project started to investigate the ELDFG issue in Myanmar water. The survey finds that the 95% of the 87 marine site surveys were affected by discarded fishing gear, with 31% of sites identified as the ELDFG hotspot in Myanmar. The project has safely removed over 1,800 kilograms of harmful ghost net from sites across the Myanmar archipelago. Therefore, this is a very challenges in Myanmar for the ELDFG fishing gears. And also, we have a study conducted by the Dr. Fritz Nansen research vessel recently found that the plastic fragments are mostly abundant in the Rakhine and Delta areas, while the fibers are most abundant from the Tanintharyi coast. Detailed analysis and the research activities are underway. And also, we have World Bank conducted the scientific survey in 5 cities and beaches of the Myanmar in 2019 and 2020. According to the survey, the top 10 most abundant plastic item leakage into the environment make up 76% of all waste, and the top 5 plastic items are responsible for the 71% of the waste leakage. So the plastic bag alone account for over 30% of the plastic pollution. There's a lot of impacts of plastic pollution in Myanmar, but Myanmar marine debris is a threat to the biodiversity, food security, and climate adaptation measure. And also Myanmar recognized the marine litter and microplastic waste not only pose a threat to our environment, but also a public health and our economy, because of the beach litters that affected our tourism economy. So Myanmar is committed to the implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda along with the mainstreamings of the environmental issue into national and sub-national development plan through the implementation of the National Myanmar Sustainable Development Plan, National Environmental Policy, Climate Change Policy, Myanmar Climate Change Strategy and Master Plan, National Waste Management Master Plan and Strategy and Master Plan, and also the Green Economy Policy Framework and Tourism Master Plan, National Contingency Plan for the marine pollution, which are the draft. Also, we have to address the land-based waste issue. The National Waste Management Strategy and Master Plan was developed by the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Conservation. Its aim to promote the development of the conservation waste management paradigm for sustainable waste management, and 3R in linkage with other national environmental policies. So recognizing the urgency and challenges related to the plastic waste management. A plastic policy option and roadmap has been developed to manage the problem concerning plastic pollution based on the data from survey led by the World Bank. National Plastic Action Plan will be developed based on the roadmap with the technical assistance of the Japan-ASEAN Integration Fund and collaboration of the stakeholders to reduce the marine plastic debris by the integrated land-to-sea approach. Myanmar does not allow the importing plastic waste, but allow the imports of the plastic scrap with which it must be clean, homogeneous, and ready to be used as the raw material. And Myanmar is now I would like to discuss about some project relating to reducing the plastic pollution. And Myanmar is participating in the capacity building on the environmentally sound management of the single-use plastic and its waste in Asian Pacific country project, which with the assistance of the BCRC China. The objective of the project is to improve the capacity of the environmentally sound management of the single-use plastic and to protect and reduce the production of the single-use plastic and its waste. But the expected the output will be used. It will be useful in the useful in the National Plastic Action Plan. And then the strengthening of the Myanmar also participate in strengthening the capacity of marine debris reduction in ASEAN region through the formulation of National Action Plan for ASEAN member states and integrated land-to-sea policy approach phase 1 and phase 2 with the assistance of the Japan-ASEAN Integration Fund. Phase 1 project is outlined the National Action Plan and identify the major challenges and needs. The phase 2 project is from 2021 to 2023, and the expected outcomes are to develop the National Action Plan for combating marine debris, promote capacity for solid waste management activities, and develop the implementation and monitoring evaluation work. And to develop the National Plastic Action Plan, the technical working group for the NPAP has set up, and the first T3G meeting was held in this in the last week to identify the gap analysis, gap and opportunity for the development of National Action Plan and how data to be collected, and to select the pilot city. And also, this is our National Plastic Action Plan outline. We have to develop by the assistant by the Japan-ASEAN JIVE project. And the overall goal of the National Plastic Action Plan is to reduce the marine plastic debris by integrated land-to-sea approach. And then there is this is the expected strategy and activities for the draft National Action Plan for Myanmar. This is the framework components are in line with the ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris. And there are some activities for the systematic plastic waste management in Myanmar. We share the knowledge regarding the plastic pollution, cooperation with the related departments to protect environmental pollution by plastic waste, suggesting the plan and activities should be for systematic plastic waste, reducing the amount of the plastic waste emitted based on the respective geographical condition. These are the some activities of our waste collection campaign and awareness raising activities in Myanmar. And then we know about the Myanmar belief that strengthening coordination and cooperation at regional and international level is key to achieve the addressing marine debris pollution. Therefore, Myanmar adopted the Bangkok Declaration on Combating Marine Debris and ASEAN Framework of Action on Marine Debris. And also Myanmar participated the ASEAN +3 Marine Plastic Debris Cooperative Action Initiative and Myanmar report to the implementation framework of action on marine plastic information sharing and for the G20. And Myanmar also endorsed the ministerial statement for the conference of the party conference on marine litter and plastic pollution. Now I would like to present the challenges and way forward to address the marine debris issue in Myanmar. There we have a lot of challenges in tackling marine debris in terms of financial resources, capacity building, and technology. There is an absence of the evidence-based data and knowledge both upstream and downstream of the plastic life cycle and value chains are crucial. Also, the unclear or overlapping mandate roles and responsibility at the different levels of agencies of government and lack of integrated regulation on marine plastic debris and other challenges in Myanmar. Besides, Myanmar has less experience in engaged with diverse stakeholders for policy making and implementation, especially with the private sector. Myanmar currently has limited information and experience infrastructure for preventing environmental leakages of plastic and adequate scientific research regarding the Myanmar marine debris and plastic pollution. Moreover, the lack of the financial mechanism for combating marine debris is also a problem in combating marine debris. And then to overcome this challenge, Myanmar need to develop the holistic policy and strategy on plastic uses and protection at national level, for example, upstream policy. We need to strengthen the technical skills and increase in financial resources. And then the private sector investment for the municipal solid waste management and technology developments need to be encouraged. And also the developing the capacity for monitoring and estimation of volume and flow of the plastic waste leakage is also necessary. Promoting awareness, research and education on the marine plastic debris and improving and promoting environmentally sound management of the plastic waste resource efficiency and 3R approach are necessary. Regarding the challenges of the plastic pollution and marine litter is transboundary and global in scope. Myanmar would strengthen the regional and international cooperation. So we need to prepare the readiness for the international legally binding instrument to end the plastic pollution. So it is the endorsement of our resolution of the UNE 5.2. So the member state has to prepare for the sustainable consumption and protection and the national to develop the national action plan and circular economy approach, and the environmentally sound waste management. We have to prepare, but we need the technical financial supports for the readiness. Hopefully, we can get the technical and financial as support to address this issue. I would like to thank you all for the opportunity to participate in this policy exchange and training course. Thank you for your kind attention.
Lisa, you're muted.
Thank you very much, Madam Han Tao, for your very in-depth and thorough analysis of the current situation in terms of protecting the marine resources and also the different steps already taken, as well as what you suggest as the next step. And I thought about your comments in terms of lacking capacity to actually move into more circular model of business. I think this is a very important point because as we know, the resource demand or requirement for implementing 2030 agenda in general is very big. And oftentimes it's not possible when you do not have extra resources coming into the state budget. So how to do that? And I think one of the things is to actually expand a little bit beyond the 17.17 to look at business participation in looking for win-win-win solutions. But also, looking for the engagement of the citizens in some of these efforts. But of course, you also mentioned, to have that kind of dialogue and collaboration is not easy. I just want to bring your attention to the UN publications about how to deal with partnerships through dialogue. That might be useful. I will put it into the reference list for the portal. But I do have a question for you, because your recommended policy is quite substantial and long. Where do you see, from your vantage point as a government, the entry point that is critical, important, but also can be successful? What would you pick from your list of reflections and recommended actions?
Okay. Thank you for your recommendation for the references. For the references, but we are starting. We start the technical working group for the develop the national plastic action plan is our starting point, and we also have to make it. Firstly, we need to the downstream policy measure to develop because as you all know, our country is a developing countries, because so we cannot go to the upstream policy of a policy measure. So we need to make sure the firstly we need to conduct the downstream measure, and other things we go beyond to the upstream measure. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this thought. It is very interesting of looking at upstream and downstream policies. And I imagine that when you talk about downstream policies, that could also comes into the municipality, the subnational level, that they also have to take on board national policy. And from the survey that we got from the participants before the course, their comments made that is a divergence in terms of approach to this. So at the municipality level, they have other urgent business to think about and to worry about. So they oftentimes are not very effective in terms of policy implementation. I wonder whether you have a quick thought in terms of this comment from the participants. We cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Yes, can you hear me now? Awareness raising.
Your voice is fading out again.
My perspective of the no. Hello.
Yeah, now
Can
it's back.
Yeah. Yes, a quick solution is the awareness raising for the citizens, awareness raising of our citizen, and the education program, and then the cleanup activities are the quick solution, maybe the quick solution, and then other than the policy making process, I think. Thank you.
Well, I think you will have a lot more to say, and our audience also will have a lot of more questions. But unfortunately, I'm poor in my moderation in terms of controlling time, so that I have to now, sort of thank you personally for your contribution and also for your patience of staying with our program. That I sort of delayed your schedule of the day, and everyone else's schedule for the day by 30 minutes almost. But before we say goodbye to each other, I want to use the opportunity to thank all the panelists, the speakers of the day, once again for a great contribution. I don't think we have sufficiently scratched the surface, but it is a jab into the very complex issues, which is highly dependent between different elements of that ecosystem. I hope this is open, it's opening our horizon, and also invite uninitiated, less informed, underinformed general population, because we are putting all this online, so it's publicly available to this very interesting, important, and also very deep challenge within the SDG 17. So with that, I would like just to make a thank you to Andy, to Fabienne, to David, to Pete, to Peter, and Eric, and Thaw for your contribution to our discussion. I imagine this is going to be a beginning of a conversation rather than sort of anywhere close to the finishing line. And I look forward to working with you once again. And before I hand it over to Jean, to Dr. Aragon, to making his closing remark, I wanted to remind everybody we do have a small evaluation, which is going beyond formalistic, but actually want to address some of the questions possibly raised today, and elicit more input from the participants of today, and so that we could further take out the program into the right direction and design it for future use. Thank you very much, and I want to bid you all a nice evening, a nice afternoon, and a nice day all over the place. So over to you, Jean.
Thank you very much, Licia. I'll be brief because I don't want to take too much of the precious time of everyone. We already went a bit, again, beyond the time we had scheduled, but that was a very interesting session, third session of the training course dedicated to Goal 14, meant to conserve and sustainably use the ocean, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development, and even freshwater we talk, which was a very interesting addition. I'd like to thank all the speakers. I took notes again, but I will not talk about this. I mean, we will have all this information in online. So I'd like to thank all the speakers, but I'd like to name them. So Mr. Andy Birchenough, Technical Officer, Office of the London Convention Protocol and Ocean Affairs International Maritime Organization, IMO. Ms. Fabienne McLellan, Managing Director, OceanCare, Switzerland. Mr. David Smith, Professor Director of the Center for Environmental Management, Coordinator of the Institute for Sustainable Development at the University of West Indies in Jamaica. Mr. Peter McIntyre, Associate Professor of Natural Resources and Environment, Dwight Webster, Sesquicentennial Faculty Fellow, Co-Director of the Adirondack Fishery Research Program, Cornell University. Mr. Deukhoon, Director General, Associate Research Fellow, Juris Doctor, International Public and Private Law, Attorney at Law, Center for International Development Cooperation, Korea Maritime Institute, KMI. Ms. Enrica Reyes, Chief Operation Officer, the Plastic Flamingo in the Philippines. And the last presenter is Thaw, Deputy Director, Environmental Conservation Department at Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment Conservation in Myanmar. Once again, I believe we all learned, not only myself, but a great deal from all the speakers today who addressed SDG 14 on life below the water. I would say, and beyond. And like the two first sessions, I think today's session was another session that could have benefited from a whole day of presentations and discussions in order to really unfold the topic that was under review. Then I'd like to thank you again, and then that's why we hope to eventually to go back also on the in-presence meeting where we could have those such discussions for at least one day per topic. So we look forward to that. Now I'd like to thank all the participants again who joined us for this the third session of the executive training for the policymakers on the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. And please join us tomorrow, Thursday, 14th of April. We'll look at the SDG 15, Life on Land, and we'll try to make to close and make the interaction between the four sessions to discuss this. I'd like now to thank, once again, Congress special thanks to Ms. Licia Steiner, you, Professor, our consultant, for the excellent work in facilitating and moderating the session today. And of course, I would like to thank again all the UNOSD staff and interns who work very hard in the shadow, behind the scenes, as we say, in making this session a success again. And we don't see them as a result of their excellent work. This is unfortunate for them, but fortunate for us that, that's the flip side of their successful work, is we don't feel their presence, exactly because they have performed so well in doing their task today. Finally, I would like to thank you all again and calling you for joining us tomorrow. I hope to see you all tomorrow. And meanwhile, I would like to wish you a very good day, evening, and or night, depending on where you are. We are in the night, and I think we'll go for it very soon on that side of the world. So again, please see you tomorrow. Please join us tomorrow, and thank you again, everyone, the speakers, and also the audience. And I would say goodbye to everyone. Thank you.